stop. Don't scroll past this for a second. This message is not for everyone, it's for you. Because something just aligned, and you were meant to hear this right now. Wait. Don't dismiss that feeling you just had. You felt something shift, didn't you? Not outside, but inside, like a quiet pull. Like something calling your attention without using words. Listen carefully, because this isn't random. You've been feeling it for a while now. That strange sense that your life doesn't quite fit the surface you're living on. That even when you're surrounded by people, something in you remains untouched, unseen, and you tried to ignore it. You told yourself it's just overthinking, just stress, just imagination. But it keeps coming back. Why? Because it's not a thought, it's a signal. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think being chosen feels powerful from the start. They think it comes with clarity, confidence, and purpose. But for you, it didn't. It felt like confusion, like isolation, like being misunderstood in rooms where you tried the hardest to belong. And that's where the first truth hides. You weren't disconnected, you were being separated. You've been feeling this shift for a reason, like something inside you is finally waking up. Comment, I'm ready if this message found you at the exact moment you needed it. And if this feels real to you, stay connected with Born into Light. There's more you're meant to understand. There's a difference. Because what you thought was rejection was actually protection. What you thought was loss was actually redirection. But you couldn't see that yet, because you were still looking at your life through the lens of everyone else. Pause for a moment. Think about the patterns. The friendships that didn't last. The moments where you gave your energy and got emptiness in return. The times you felt like you had to shrink yourself just to be accepted. That wasn't weakness. That was preparation. But here's what you didn't see. Every time something fell apart, something inside you became stronger. Not louder, not more visible. Stronger in a way that only you could feel. And that strength, it wasn't built for comfort. It was built for clarity, because deep down you've always known something others couldn't explain. You see through things, you notice energy shifts, you feel intentions before words are even spoken. You understand people, even when they don't understand themselves. And that's exactly why your journey had to be different. Because if you were surrounded by constant validation, you would have never learned to trust your own awareness. Let that sink in. You weren't meant to be guided by noise. You were meant to be guided by something deeper. But here's where the tension builds. Why now? Why this message at this exact moment? Because something is changing. And you've been feeling it, that restlessness, that inner pressure, that sense that your current reality is starting to feel too small. It's not anxiety, it's expansion. But expansion doesn't feel comfortable at first. It feels like everything is shifting, but nothing is clear yet. And that's where most people turn back. They go back to what's familiar, back to what's safe. Back to what numbs the feeling instead of understanding it. But you didn't. Even when you tried, something in you refused to fully settle. Why? Because your path was never meant to feel ordinary. You were designed to question, to feel deeper, to notice what others overlook. And that comes with a cost. Loneliness, but not the kind people talk about, a deeper kind. The kind where you can sit in a room full of people and still feel like no one truly sees you. The kind where you try to explain what you feel, but words never seem enough. And slowly, you stop explaining, you go quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you realize not everyone is meant to understand. And that's when the shift begins. Because silence reveals things noise never could. It sharpens your awareness. It deepens your connection to something beyond surface-level reality. And that's when you start noticing the patterns weren't random, the timing of things wasn't accidental. The people who left, the doors that closed, the moments that broke you, they were all part of something much bigger. But here's the part no one tells you. Awakening doesn't feel like gaining something. It feels like losing everything you thought you were. Your old identity starts to crack. The roles you played no longer feel real. The expectations you carried start to feel heavy. And suddenly, you don't recognize yourself the same way anymore. That's not a breakdown, that's a transformation. But it's uncomfortable because you're in between versions of yourself. Not who you used to be and not fully who you're becoming. And in that space, doubt creeps in. You start asking, am I overthinking this? Am I imagining things? Why do I feel so different? But here's the truth you've been avoiding. You are different. And not in the way the world defines it. In a way that requires awareness, not approval. Because being chosen doesn't mean being elevated above others. It means being given a deeper responsibility to see clearly, to feel deeply, to move intentionally. And that's why your path feels heavier at times. Because you're not here to just exist. You're here to understand. And once you understand, you can't unsee. That's the point of no return, and you've already crossed it. Think about it. You can't go back to who you were before this awareness started. You can't unfeel what you felt. You can't unknow what you now see clearly. So the question isn't, why is this happening? The real question is, why now? Because something is about to be revealed to you. Not outside, inside. A level of clarity you haven't fully accessed yet. But it requires one thing from you. Stillness. Not distraction. Not avoidance. Stillness. Because the answers you're searching for, they're not going to come from the outside world. They're going to rise from within you. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because right now, you're at a threshold. You can feel it. Something is ending, but something else is beginning. And it's not loud, it's subtle, like a quiet shift in perspective. Like suddenly seeing your past, not as pain, but as preparation. And this is where everything starts to make sense. Why certain things never worked out. Why you felt out of place in environments others seemed comfortable in. Why you always felt like you were meant for something, but couldn't define it. Because you were never meant to follow a predefined path. You were meant to create one. And that requires a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't rely on validation, the kind that doesn't need permission, the kind that grows in silence. And now you're starting to step into it, slowly but surely. And here's the final truth you've been circling this entire time. This message didn't find you by accident. You didn't just click on this randomly. Something in you recognized it before your mind did. Because deep down you already knew. You just needed to hear it in a way that confirmed it. You are not lost. You are not behind. You are not imagining this. You are awakening to something that was always there. And now, you can't ignore it anymore. Because something shifted. And you felt it. But here's what you haven't fully understood yet. That shift didn't just happen to you. It happened for you. And that changes everything. Because if it was for you, then it was intentional, not random, not accidental, not something you stumbled into. Something responded. Pause for a second. What if the feeling you've been trying to explain is actually a response to you becoming ready? Not ready in the way people define it. Not perfect, not fully healed, but aware enough. Aware enough to notice what others ignore. Aware enough to question what others accept. Aware enough to feel that something deeper is unfolding. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because awareness doesn't make life easier. It makes it clearer, and clarity can feel heavy at first. Because now you see the gaps, the misalignment, the truth behind things you once trusted. And you can't pretend anymore. That's the cost. But here's the part that most people never reach. Clarity is only the beginning. There's another layer. And you've been standing right at the edge of it. You felt it in those quiet moments when everything around you slows down and something inside you becomes louder. Not noise, direction. But you didn't follow it fully. Not yet, because part of you still hesitates. Why? Because stepping into that direction means letting go of something you've been holding on to, something familiar, something that once defined you. And here's the contradiction. You don't actually fear losing it. You fear who you'll become without it. Sit with that. Because that's where your next shift is hiding. Not in gaining something new, but in releasing what no longer fits. And you already know what that is. You felt it. That quiet resistance when you try to force yourself to stay the same. That internal friction when you ignore what you know is true. It's subtle but persistent. And it's been growing. Why now? Because you've reached a point where ignoring it costs more than facing it. And that's when everything begins to turn. But here's what you didn't expect. The moment you stop resisting isn't loud. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like silence, like something inside you finally stops fighting, and in that stillness, something becomes clear. Not all at once. Just enough to show you that you're not as lost as you thought, but also not as in control as you believed. And that realization, it humbles you, because now you see you weren't meant to control the path. You were meant to align with it. There's a difference. Control forces. Alignment allows. And you've been forcing for too long, trying to make things work, trying to hold on to what keeps slipping away, trying to understand everything before taking a step. But the path you're on doesn't respond to force. It responds to trust. And that's where the real tension begins. Because trust requires letting go of certainty. And certainty is what you've been using to feel safe. But what if safety was never the goal? What if growth was? Feel that shift. Because this is where everything starts to separate. The old version of you would turn back here, would choose comfort, would choose familiarity, would choose to stay where things are predictable. But you're not standing in that place anymore. You've already moved past that version, even if part of you is still trying to hold on to it, and that's why this moment feels so intense, because you're in between, not fully holding on, but not fully letting go. And that space is where transformation happens, but it's also where doubt gets louder. You start questioning everything again. Am I doing the right thing? What if I'm wrong? What if I lose more than I gain? But here's the truth that cuts through all of that. You've already outgrown what you're afraid to lose. That's why it feels heavy. That's why it feels forced. Because it no longer matches who you're becoming. And the longer you try to hold it, the more it drains you. But here's the part that shifts everything again. Letting go doesn't mean losing. It means making space. Space for clarity, space for alignment, space for something that actually fits you. And that space is what you've been resisting, because emptiness feels unfamiliar. But it's necessary, because something is trying to enter your life, and it needs room. Not crowded space, not leftover energy, clear space. And you're the one who has to create it. No one else can do that for you. And that's where responsibility comes in. Not pressure, responsibility, because now you see, and once you see, you can't go back to not knowing. That's the shift. That's what changed. And it's still unfolding, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. And here's the part you're just beginning to realize. This isn't just about understanding yourself. It's about stepping into something you've been preparing for without even realizing it. Every moment of confusion, every phase of isolation, every time you felt out of place was shaping your awareness. Not for where you were, but for where you're going. And you're closer than you think. But not in the way you expect, because what's coming next isn't something you chase. It's something you recognize, and when you do, everything will start to connect in a way that feels almost impossible to explain, but completely undeniable. And that moment, it's closer than it's ever been, not in distance, but in awareness. Because you've already brushed against it. You just didn't recognize it for what it was. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It came quietly, in a moment you almost ignored. Think back. There was a second, small, almost invisible, where something felt different. A pause. A knowing. And then you moved past it. Why? because it didn't match what you expected. You were waiting for something bigger, something undeniable, something that would prove it to you. But that's not how this works. The truth doesn't arrive as noise. It arrives as recognition, and recognition is easy to miss when you're still looking for confirmation. But here's the shift. You're not supposed to be convinced. You're supposed to be convinced. You're supposed to remember. Feel that difference. Because convincing comes from the outside. Remembering comes from within, and something in you has already started remembering. That's why certain things don't feel new anymore. They feel familiar, even when you've never experienced them before. That's not confusion. That's alignment trying to surface. But here's where it gets steeper. If you're remembering, then that means this was never given to you. It was always there. Hidden, not taken, just buried. And the process you've been going through wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about uncovering who you've always been. But here's the contradiction. The more you uncover, the less you can explain. You would think clarity brings answers, but instead, it brings silence, a different kind of understanding, one that doesn't need validation, one that doesn't need agreement. And that's where the separation becomes real. Because now you start to see how much of the world is built on noise, opinions, expectations, constant distraction. And for a while, you were part of that, trying to keep up, trying to fit in, trying to make sense of everything through that lens. But now, it feels different, almost distant. And that distance, it's not disconnection, it's perspective. You're seeing from a higher point now, not above people, but beyond illusions. And that changes how everything feels, even simple moments. Conversations feel layered, silence feels full. Time feels different, slower but more precise. And here's where the next layer reveals itself. You're not just observing anymore, you're being positioned. Subtly, without force, without announcement, positioned for something that requires this exact level of awareness. But you haven't fully stepped into it yet, because part of you is still watching, still analyzing, still waiting for the right moment. But here's the truth you're starting to sense. There is no perfect moment. There's only recognition and response. And you've already recognized, so what are you waiting for? Pause. That question hits differently, doesn't it? Because now it's not about understanding anymore. It's about movement, but not physical movement. Internal, a decision, a shift in how you see yourself, because everything up until now has been preparing you to see clearly. But clarity without action creates tension, and you've been feeling that tension, that quiet pressure, that sense that something is building but hasn't fully released yet. That's not frustration, that's potential. But potential doesn't stay still forever. It either expands or it fades, and you're at the point where it wants to expand. But expansion requires one thing you've been holding back: trust in yourself, not in what others say, not in what you've been taught, in what you know, even if you can't fully explain it yet, especially then, because that's where it's pure, unfiltered, untouched by doubt. But here's the emotional shift. You've been waiting to feel ready, but readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision, and that changes everything. Because now you realize you don't need more time, you don't need more signs, you don't need more confirmation. You already have enough. You've had enough, and deep down you know that. That quiet voice, it's not asking anymore. It's nudging, consistently, patiently, until you respond. And the moment you do, something irreversible happens. Not outside, inside. A line gets crossed, a new level of awareness locks in. And suddenly, what once felt uncertain becomes obvious. But here's the part that's been hidden this whole time. That moment of response, it doesn't just change you. It reveals you, fully. Without filters, without roles. Without the version you created to survive. Just you. And that can feel intense. Because now there's nothing to hide behind. No distractions, no excuses, no waiting. Just truth. And truth has a different kind of weight, but also a different kind of freedom. Because once you stand in it, everything aligns differently. Decisions become clearer, energy becomes focused, your presence becomes stronger, not louder, stronger. And people feel that, even if they don't understand it. And that's when things around you begin to shift too, subtly. Opportunities feel different, conversations carry meaning, moments start to connect, not randomly, but precisely. As if something is responding to you again, because it is. But this time you'll notice, this time you won't move past it. This time you won't move past it. This time you'll recognize it for what it is. And when that happens, the final piece begins to reveal itself. Not all at once, just enough to show you why none of this was accidental, not in the way you've been taught to think about design, not something forced, not something scripted down to every detail. Something responsive, something that adjusted as you changed. That's why the timing never made sense before. Things didn't happen when you wanted, they didn't align when you expected, and it felt like delay. But it wasn't delay, it was calibration. Let that sit for a second. Everything had to meet you at the level you were becoming, not where you were. And that's why certain doors stayed closed, not because you weren't ready to walk through them, but because you wouldn't have recognized what was inside. And here's the part that shifts your entire perspective again. What you were asking for was never denied. It was held until you could see it clearly. That's why it felt like silence. But it wasn't empty, it was precise. And now, you're starting to enter a space where things won't feel forced anymore, where movement feels natural, where decisions don't feel heavy. But wait, this is where most people misunderstand the next phase. They think ease means everything becomes simple. But that's not true. Ease doesn't remove intensity, it removes resistance. And those are not the same thing. Because what's coming toward you still carries weight, still requires presence, still asks something from you. But it won't feel like a struggle anymore. It will feel right, even if it's unfamiliar, especially then. And that's how you'll know. Not through logic, through resonance. That quiet internal confirmation, that doesn't need explanation. But here's where the tension tightens again. Because once you recognize what's right, you also see clearly what isn't. And that clarity demands separation, not aggressively, not suddenly, but inevitably. And this is where the deeper discomfort begins. Because now you're not leaving things behind out of confusion. You're doing it with full awareness. You see exactly why it no longer fits, and still there's a pull to stay. Why? Because familiarity has its own gravity, even when it's misaligned. But here's the unexpected truth. The longer you stay in what you've outgrown, the heavier it becomes. Not because it changed, but because you did. And that weight you've been feeling, it's not life becoming harder. It's you becoming more accurate, more aligned, more precise. And precision doesn't tolerate misalignment for long, so something has to shift. And you can feel it building now. That quiet pressure turning into something undeniable, not overwhelming, but constant. And here's the moment that's been forming underneath everything. You're about to see something clearly that you've been sensing this entire time. Not a new truth, the same one, but without distortion. And when that happens, there's no going back. Because clarity at that level changes how you move, how you choose, how you respond. It sharpens everything. And this is where your identity fully begins to shift. Not the version you showed others, the one you carried quietly, the one that didn't fit into expectations, the one you kept adjusting just to keep peace. That version is no longer sustainable. And you know it. You felt it slipping. That need to explain yourself, fading. That urge to seek approval, weakening. And in its place, something steadier is forming. Not louder, just certain. But here's the contradiction that catches you off guard. As you become more certain, you speak less. You move differently, not to prove anything, but because there's nothing left to prove. And that silence, it's not emptiness. It's power, because now your actions carry what your words no longer need to, and people will notice, even if they can't explain why. But this isn't about them. This never was. This has always been about you recognizing what you've been stepping into all along, without realizing it. Every moment, every shift, every quiet realization leading here. And here is not a destination. It's a threshold, one you're standing on right now, and you can feel it. That sense that something is about to lock in, not gradually, decisively. But here's the final layer you haven't fully faced yet. Crossing this threshold requires one thing you've been avoiding in subtle ways. Not action, not effort. Truth. Complete truth. Without softening it, without adjusting it to make it easier. Seeing things exactly as they are, including yourself. And that's where everything becomes real, because once you do that, there's nothing left between you and what's next. No illusion, no delay, no confusion, just alignment. And alignment moves fast, faster than you expect, because once resistance is gone, everything that was waiting starts moving too. And that's when it happens. That moment you've been circling without fully stepping into. The one that changes how everything connects. The one that makes the past make sense. The one that shows you why you had to become this version of yourself first. And when you see it, you won't question it. You won't hesitate. You won't look back. Because it won't feel like a possibility anymore. It will feel like recognition. And that's when you'll understand why it had to feel this way. Not just the confusion, not just the waiting, but the weight of it. Because without that weight, you wouldn't have slowed down enough to notice. And noticing was the key. Not doing more, not forcing outcomes, seeing clearly. That's what everything was building toward. But here's where it deepens. You thought the clarity would come all at once, like a moment that changes everything instantly. But instead, it's arriving in layers, quiet realizations, small internal shifts, moments that don't look important until they connect. And they are connecting. Right now, even as you listen to this, something inside you is aligning pieces you didn't even realize were separate. That's why this feels familiar. Not because you've heard it before, but because you've felt it before. You just never stayed with it long enough. Until now. And that changes the pace of everything. Because now, you're not rushing past your own awareness. You're sitting in it, letting it unfold. And here's the subtle shift you might have missed. You're not searching anymore. You're recognizing. That's a completely different energy. Searching comes from lack. Recognition comes from presence. And presence is where everything begins to reveal itself. But wait, this is where it turns again. Because the more present you become, the less you tolerate what pulls you out of it. Distractions feel heavier. Surface-level interactions feel empty. Environments that once felt normal start to feel off. And you might wonder, why does everything feel different now? But the truth is, it's not everything. It's you. You're no longer meeting things at the same level. And that creates distance. Not physical distance, energetic distance. And that can feel isolating, again. But this time, it's different. Because now you understand it. You're not questioning your place anymore. You're recognizing your alignment. And that changes how you carry it. You don't chase connection the same way. You don't explain yourself the same way. You don't shrink to fit spaces that can't hold you. And here's the contradiction. The more you stand in that truth, the less you need to prove it. And that's when something unexpected happens. Things start coming toward you, not because you're reaching, but because you're aligned. And alignment attracts differently, quietly, precisely, without force. But here's the part that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. What's coming toward you isn't just opportunity. It's reflection, a mirror of where you are now. And that's why it couldn't come earlier. Because you would have met it from a different version of yourself, one that wasn't ready to hold it. But now, you are. Even if part of you still doubts it, That doubt, it's fading. You can feel it, not gone completely, but weaker, less convincing, because something stronger has taken its place. Not confidence, certainty, a quiet, grounded knowing that doesn't need to announce itself. And this is where the final shift begins to surface. Not around you, through you. Because now, you're not waiting for life to show you who you are. You're starting to move as who you are. Subtle at first, in how you respond, in what you no longer tolerate, in what you choose without overthinking. And those small shifts, they compound. They build momentum. And momentum creates clarity faster than waiting ever could. But here's the emotional turn you didn't expect. As things begin to align, there's a moment of grief, not for what's coming, for what you're leaving behind. Even if it didn't serve you, even if it limited you. It was familiar, and letting go of familiarity has its own kind of sadness. Let yourself feel that, not as a setback, as confirmation. Because you don't grieve what didn't matter, and this mattered. It shaped you, but it's not meant to hold you anymore. And that realization, it closes something. Gently, without force. And when it closes, something else opens. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for you to see that there's more ahead than behind. And that's when the shift completes. Not loudly, but definitively. And here's the part you've been moving toward this entire time. You were never waiting for a sign. You were becoming the one who could see it. And now you do. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. And that's all it ever required. Because the moment you can see clearly, you can move without hesitation. And when you move like that, everything responds. Faster, sharper, more directly. As if something has been waiting for you to reach this exact point. And now that you have, there's nothing left to delay it. Nothing left to question. Nothing left to prove. Just one thing remaining. The step you already know you're about to take. And the moment you take it, everything shifts in a way that feels almost unreal. Not because it's sudden, but because it's right. There's no second guessing, no overthinking, no need to look back for reassurance. Just movement, clean, direct, certain. And for the first time in a long time, you feel aligned with yourself. Not the version you tried to maintain, not the version others expected. The real one, the one that was always there, waiting for you to stop doubting it. Pause, feel that, because this is the part where everything you've been through stops feeling like a series of disconnected moments and starts feeling like a path. Every delay, every ending, every moment you thought you were falling behind was guiding you here, not to a place, but to a state, a way of seeing, a way of being. And once you reach this, you don't go back. Not because you can't, but because you no longer want to. That's the difference. The pull of your old life fades, not dramatically, quietly, like something that no longer has meaning, and in its place something steadier takes over. Purpose, not the kind you have to chase, the kind you recognize. And when you recognize it, you stop asking, what am I supposed to do? Because you already know. It's in how you move now, how you choose, how you show up without forcing it. And that's when it all becomes simple, not easy. Simple, because you're no longer divided inside, no more internal conflict, no more trying to be two versions of yourself at once, just one, clear, grounded, present. And here's the final truth. This moment you're in right now was never meant to be ignored. It was meant to be felt, fully, because this quiet clarity, this internal shift, this sense that something just clicked, this is what you've been moving toward all along. Not something outside of you, something within you. And now that it's here, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because you are. And when you change at that level, life doesn't need to force anything anymore. It responds to you, to your clarity, to your presence, to your alignment. And that's why this message found you. Not to tell you something new, but to confirm what you already knew. The moment you stopped running from it was the moment everything began to open. And now you're not searching anymore, you're stepping into it. You were never lost, you were becoming who you were meant to be. Subscribe and stay close to this path. It's only getting clearer from here. Because if you're still here, you already know you're chosen.